Regions
Oh, and the first attack of the game is a miss as Stonehenge misses, but Rotom's Will-O-Wisp also missing.
Reduce the amount of times Aaron's Pokemon are attacking. Hopefully both the trainers give their Pokemon a pep talk this game to help them aim a little bit better, because they were losing turns mostly to accuracy last game, and I see that hasn't changed.
Yeah, nothing has changed for Aaron Zhang, as his Rotom is still unable to hit that Will-O-Wisp, but a critical hit, and the Will-O-Wisp out from Rotom also are going to be avoided. 4 for 4, but it is going to try for another Will-O-Wisp. Will it hit? No, of course not. Of course Rotom is not going to hit with that Will-O-Wisp.
What you just witnessed is one of the most statistically improbable things to ever happen in high-level competitive Pokemon. Aaron Zhang, one of the world's best players, missed every Will-O-Wisp attack for 5 attempts in a row. The odds of this happening are 0.098%. As a fighting game player, seeing this is enough to make me cringe, since our community loves to turn away from the influence of randomness in our outcomes. For us, every interaction should be a skill-based one where game knowledge and reaction times come out on top. I only bring up the Pokemon example in the beginning to illustrate this idea because for that form of competition, playing the odds is part of the skill and part of getting good, so to speak. Aaron Zhang kept running the play 5 times because statistically, the numbers were on his side, and once again, that's just part of the game. RNG is built into that experience. Randomness in general is a very common element in games that's added to create depth and variance.
Uncertainty as being an essential part of games. As he says, in designing games, a degree of uncertainty is essential, and that if there is no uncertainty, then it is not a game.
In modern times, it's almost impossible to even think of something like this being implemented in a major fighting game's mechanics, but back in the day, it wasn't that outlandish of an idea. In Super Turbo, when 2 characters input a throw at the same time, the winner is chosen completely at random. Or, as another example, when knocked down, characters are invincible for a random amount of frames on their wake-up, which can make some attacks and setups inconsistent. Super Turbo is actually home to tons of randomness like this, with attacks doing inconsistent stun and damage as well. As fighting games progressed, random aspects of them have been removed since these games were the original esports and went on to be the pinnacle of gaming competitions. Consistency was then the name of the game, with random chance being left to niche mechanics or maybe certain characters here and there. Third Strike is a great example of this, considering its unique tiebreaker mechanic, Judgment. Third Strike's mechanics in general work the way we're used to, with standardized values on pretty much everything, but in the case that a round ends in a double KO or a timeout, unique characters will appear on stage and act as judges, scoring the bout. Unfortunately, Judgment doesn't work according to any rules that we as players can figure out, so it essentially does seem to be random in the case of a tie. With that said, it's so random that in tournament, any win that results from a judgment decision is overturned and the players continue to play the match out again as if the previous one didn't even happen. Obviously, you don't see things like this in major releases nowadays, most likely because there's a lot of money on the line in fighting game competitions, so closing the skill gap with random occurrences doesn't seem to be in anyone's favor. This is all to say that introducing randomness into your games is a delicate balancing act. Too much and wins don't feel earned. Too little and strategies become too powerful. So here's the big question. What constitutes good and bad randomness in fighting games? To answer that question, let's start with the 2 specific types of randomness in games. The first type is one I mentioned earlier called output randomness. Output randomness describes the noise between a player's input and then what actually happens on the other side. Think of rolling a die in Risk or trying to attack your opponent in Pokemon.
Wow! That was brutal! Oh! It's down!
In fighting games, there's a lot of different examples, but one that fits this topic perfectly is Dan's Red Fireball. Essentially, Dan had an infinite combo that could kill the timer and do way more damage than he was ever supposed to be able to do.
Talk about Dan in the light that we do. He's not stopping James. He's not gonna stop James. Let's go. We got Dan Infinites on stream. Nerf it to the ground. That's all I Nerf it to the ground.
Instead of changing the properties of the combo itself or nerfing Dan, Capcom thought of giving him a red Godolkin that would only appear 15% of the time, giving him a buffed fireball. It was a cool idea, but they essentially only added this RNG to remove Dan's already game-breaking infinite. Funnily enough, this was actually a nod to the random red fireballs of Street Fighter II that the devs threw in as an Easter egg. This red fireball effectively takes away a player's agency in completing their combos or pressure strings and forces them to react on the fly to a random chance event. Mind you, I actually love this change and I think it was a creative way to remove an infinite while keeping a character true to who he is. Output randomness like this isn't uncommon in fighting games, with characters like Shingo in KOF 15 being based around the concept entirely. For Shingo, he has a random chance to enhance the properties of all of his special moves, which allows for more damage, better cancels, or just varied follow-ups in general. When he spends meter, the odds of these moves being enhanced is even greater, and it makes for a dynamic playstyle where no two rounds ever play out the same. I've dubbed characters based around this kind of randomness as critical hit characters, as that's usually how output randomness determines their move properties.
In the balance of power here, where Robert may be a little more comfortable. I take it back. Where the crit hits. Yeltoros. Oh boy.
Omen from Killer Instinct is another interesting case, as he has a fireball that can take up to 11 different paths and he can shoot up to 3 at a time. Players then have to react to what kind they get and push their offense respectively. It isn't exactly a critical hit in the sense that the others are, but it is a fantastic example of output randomness in effect.
Without a fight, maintains the health lead. And as you can see there, the projectiles, the RNG paying off, threading the needle with the hail, giving Insightful an opportunity to close in, forward fierce punch, and getting the shadow to convert, but drop the main, manages to get the help anyway.
But what if we looked at this critical hit idea a bit more closely? What if there was a chance your attacks could fail? The obvious answer of this is Game & Watch from Smash Bros. If you don't already know, Game & Watch's hammer has a random chance to do one of 9 different things. Each effect is tied to a different number and they vary greatly. If you pull a 1, you actually end up doing damage to yourself, but what you really want is the greatly coveted 9.
Whoa, calm down, Jamal. Don't pull out the 9.
If Game & Watch pulls a 9, it's almost guaranteed to kill their opponent if it lands. This opens up cool decisions for players who want to leave certain outcomes up to random chance, looking for a critical hit, or if they want to go for weaker but guaranteed damage.
Yes, that's right.
Oh my God!
Side V9!
To find out how critical hits could be implemented in a more traditional fighting game, we have to dig a little deeper. Luckily, my research into Pokemon actually helped here, as it led me to Croagunk from Pokken Tournament. I've mentioned this game on this channel before, and I really do think it has some good ideas. Croagunk may or may not be one of them. I genuinely can't tell. To show you what I mean, Croagunk has 3 major elements of RNG in his kit I want to mention. Firstly, he can apply buffs and debuffs to himself or his opponent depending on random chance. Secondly, the frame data of a lot of these moves change in accordance to what version comes out due to that RNG. And lastly, he can throw projectiles in the air that come out randomly and also have different properties. The last one is actually pretty simple and easy to understand, so we're not going to talk too much about that. What really matters is the first 2 aspects of Croagunk's game plan. Well, I say game plan, but that might be a bit generous.
The instant this random number generator reaches 0, you'll be executed.
Oh.
10, 3, 12, 3 again.
Through moves like Poison Jab, Croagunk can apply a buff or debuff to himself or his opponent, and what that status ends up being is totally random. So, players have to react to what's happening on the fly, as it's pretty much out of their control. Now, the situation isn't totally hopeless if you buff the opponent or debuff yourself. In the case of a buffed opponent, Croagunk can use Thief to apply buffs onto himself, stealing them from the opponent. In the case of a debuffed Croagunk, his DP becomes frame 1 invincible and does a decent chunk of damage. This allows you to become more defensively powerful even when your character is literally debuffed. In the case of a doubly buffed Croagunk, he gets an unblockable high damage attack that looks very familiar to something Tekken fans might recognize. All in all, I find this design to be pretty cool and even a great adaptation of the way Pokemon deals with RNG, but at the end of the day, he's not a very strong character.
Alright.
This is getting close to a timeout here. Gonna use that curse for a water guarantee.
Oh no,
chip
Santa's
and
RNG.
pull you
yeah,
down
I think he
one.
realized. He just he just went on the floor.
His luck finally ran out.
Yeah.
Basing a character around output randomness in a fighting game leads to players questioning their decisions more often than the players who don't need to worry about it. It's why random characters have the potential to be very strong, but by that same sentiment, they actually have even more potential to be weaker, especially when you introduce more and more randomness. Fighting games are very deterministic games in that players need to be able to trust that what they input into a game is what comes out. Jeff Engelstein, a renowned tabletop game designer, had this to say about including the two types of randomness in your game.
Whereas output randomness is typically going to feel more random. There's little things that you can do if it becomes more tactical in that you have a shorter planning horizon. And is typically associated with lower skill caps. Typically, input randomness built into a game will lead to strategy, a more strategic feel to the game, gives the players more sense of control, and rewards more skillful play.
I think this idea is why we see more input randomness in fighting games than output. Control is the name of the game in these cases, and input randomness yields itself to that more naturally. Input randomness informs the player before they make a decision. A great example of this is knowing what cards you have in your hand before you make a bet in a game of poker. The cards dealt to you are random, but what you do with them isn't. And this transitions well into what I think is the most common type of random character in fighting games, the grab bag characters. As their name suggests, grab bag characters will draw items or moves from a proverbial grab bag and have them available for combos, mix-ups, and whatever else in between. Usually for these characters, they'll have a random item appear with some kind of indicator that shows it's ready for use, or they'll have a selection of items to use at their leisure. Because players are able to see what options they've drawn, strategies can form in the meantime between them using them and interacting with the opponent. A great example is Faust, who in the latest version of Guilty Gear Strive can store an item from his bag and use it when he's ready to let it go. He didn't always have that control, but now that he does, Faust players can prepare more deadly mix-ups and tricky situations to take their opponents down. Even with this recent buff though, Faust is still considered one of the weaker characters in the game because so much of his win condition is just a what if. You've really got to believe in the heart of the cards to make a character like this work for you.
And that's been fixed, and the Scarecrow stuff has been fixed, so utilize that. Oh, that was the end. The hammer was on him. There's too much to look for. The layers. Apology, man, you scumbag. You nasty son of a gun. That was good. That was layers. I mean, if the command throw whip, the hammer was there. Having that awareness, though, no matter what comes out, the items, key for this character.
Speaking of cards, there is another character in Guilty Gear Strive with the design philosophy built around RNG, and that's Asuka. Asuka is built unlike any other character I've ever come across in a fighting game, as his whole game plan revolves around shuffling and utilizing a full deck of cards. If you haven't seen by now, Asuka's a spellcaster who has to manage his own unique meter, which directly correlates to his defensive and offensive capabilities. Asuka players generally have to juggle twice as many resources as anyone else playing the game, while also dealing with the randomly generated moveset in the process, as each card decides what special moves he has. I can say without a doubt that he is the most conceptually complicated character I have ever touched in the history of fighting games.
All of Asuka's spells are great pokes in neutral, but don't get OTG'd by the negative edge, or your ass will be grass and you'll get bodied hard. Thank you for watching.
And while it might seem like this difficulty would make him unreasonable to actually use in a match, we've seen multiple times that this isn't the case. In fact, Gobo used Asuka to win EVO Japan, a super major level event. Because of the information provided by input randomness, Gobo was able to control his situation based on the resources given to him and manage them accordingly. In my opinion, Asuka is the best example of how to implement randomness in a fighting game character while not mitigating their strengths too much. Leaving the control all up to the player really does go a long way in making a character that still feels good to use, even when they can be weak at times. In the right hands, Asuka is allowed to be one of the strongest characters in the game because of all the time and effort it takes to understand what he even does. The balance between skill and randomness seems to be in perfect equilibrium. But when implementing randomness into a character, there's obvious implications of removing an element of control over the game from people playing that character. And when the randomness also allows for insanely powerful win conditions, you might wind up taking away the control from the other player too. In cases where randomness is too prevalent, you get something that relies less on skill and more on pure RNG. In other words, a wild card.
Brakes aren't working. No, I'm saying, no, brakes! Guys, why aren't the brakes working?
Because I cut the brakes! Wild card, bitches! Yeah!
What? Oh my god!
Upon release, Hero had a mix of both input and output randomness. On the output side, he had critical hits on his smash attacks that could kill characters at absurdly low percentages. On top of that, he also has a special move called Thwack that has a small chance of instantly killing his opponents. Thwack isn't a move he can access whenever he wants like Game & Watch's Hammer though. Thwack was one of 21 moves that Hero could access from his down B command selection. In this way, he's actually pretty similar to Asuka, as he's able to pull up a menu of 4 randomly selected moves that cost different amounts of mana to execute. The moves range in damage and type of attack, so players have to juggle the decisions in real time while attempting to pull them off. With the combinations of certain spells like Oomph or Psych Up with critical hits, Hero becomes the character with the most kill potential in the game. There are downsides to some of these moves, like Kamikaze causing Hero to give up a stock, or Kaklang turning you into metal off stage in a vulnerable spot. He's even got a spell called Hocus Pocus, which gives a completely random effect that isn't accessible by normal competitive means in Smash. In any case, I bring this up because such amounts of randomness really do close the skill cap for both players and make it feel like you might as well play a game of high card instead of competitive fighting games. For this reason, as well as others, players discussed banning Hero from competitive Smash as it really was just random. Why play a skill-based game when the skill seems to be just hope he doesn't pull his strongest moves from a menu?
Pro-ban people may say no, if Hero becomes lucky enough, he is simply too strong to be considered fair. While others may say yes, a lucky Hero is still balanced, or even that Hero needs a bit of luck to be viable in the first place.
The reason Hero was so controversial and Asuka isn't is because they both embody different correlations of randomness to the flow of their respective games. While playing Asuka, there's a smaller chance that big things will happen when you cycle through his moves, and it's easy to determine when that's about to change, as he usually has to spend meter and stop time for him to control what he actually gets, meaning it isn't actually random anymore. But for Hero, nothing really informs you of what he's going to get, and a lot of his moves get stronger as the match goes on, like Thwack having a higher chance of killing or Magic Burst doing more damage the more MP he has, meaning that there's a big chance of bigger things happening.
He almost died. He went for the flag, and I appreciate that. Hocus Pocus is the dumbest move, and you cannot tell me otherwise.
You could say Hero is the dumbest move, and I would agree.
You know what? That's a good point.
These two character designs highlight how delicate the balance is and taught me something all the while. To successfully implement RNG into your fighting game, it seems you need to follow 3 overall principles. 1. Informing the players is more acceptable than not informing them. 2. Feedback and outcomes should allow for strategic decision making. And 3, RNG should not override the deterministic nature of the game. Balancing these 3 principles will create a game that allows for RNG in a way that keeps both players in control of their strategies while still interacting with the randomness in a natural way. Forcing interactions with randomness for the sake of it usually weakens a character or makes them strong beyond reason. As I mentioned before, fighting games do usually boil down to knowledge and reaction times, with checkmate scenarios being few and far between. The context of the events of any match are what should dominate the overall game state, and anything less than that suddenly feels like a less fun fighting game to play. It's for this reason that competitive Smash Bros. Is such a stripped-down game where lots of random events are removed. Things like stage hazards, items, and instant kill moves are taken out so that players can decide the flow of events themselves instead of running the risk of getting cheesed by a Pokemon that can throw them off stage at 0%.
Definitely a game of tag here. Yeah. You can see Hikaru just definitely running away, but here comes the item. Is this going to be it? Be careful. Oh, he clips him.
And let me be clear, this isn't inherently a bad thing. Smash was designed to use randomness to decrease the skill gap between players, and that's a noble way to design a fighting game for sure. Hero isn't a poorly designed character. In fact, he does exactly what he's supposed to do, and I think that's the beautiful thing about balancing games like this. Tipping the scales a little too far one way or the other can make games objectively broken or excessively static depending on your approach. What this seems to boil down to is that randomness does have a place in fighting games, and it can serve multiple purposes in game balance or character design. The most important thing seems to be understanding what kinds of randomness to use and where.
When you're making decisions for the players in terms of how they're approaching things, look at input versus output randomness and how that's going to affect planning, how that's going to affect strategy, how that's going to affect analysis paralysis of players that have to consider every last thing.
That's all I've got for now, so let me know your favorite uses of randomness in fighting games that I might have missed down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.